Hi, thank you for joining me. In this video, I want to think about what exactly is wrong with democracy. Now, I don't mean that tongue in cheek. Certainly, we understand that all democratic systems have their problems, but that's sort of exactly the point. One of the things that we understand about democracy, and in fact, all political systems or political ideals, is that it carries with it certain inherent contradictions. And so in this video, I want to discuss what those contradictions are and then also begin to discuss or at least think through what some of the solutions to these problems might be. Now, in a previous video, and if you haven't seen it, I encourage you to go ahead and go and check it out. I discussed the idea, or I presented the idea, that when thinking about democracy, it's best not to think of it or any other political system as being a yes or a no condition. It's not that you simply have no democracy or you have all democracy, but rather democratic systems should be thought of as existing in degrees. You become more or less democratic. And in that way, you might think of democracy as being a goal that you're constantly trying to attain. Now, when thinking about what a perfect democracy might be, or when thinking about how to grade or evaluate any political system on a scale from 0 to 10 or 0 to 100, I mentioned in the previous video that there are 4 basic characteristics to democratic systems. The first one is popular control, the idea that people get to vote for issues or get to choose their representatives who then make decisions for them. And then also that there are principles or characteristics of the political system that allow individuals to be able to voice their opinions and participate in politics, or that they're equal in their say or their participation in politics, or that once decisions are made, that you know that the law is going to be followed, rule of law, rather than the whims of the leaders or the whims of a small group. So given that, one of the things that we also know is that no democratic system has been perfectly democratic. And so let's talk a little bit about why that is. Now, at the outset, I want to present maybe what's a controversial argument. Any political system that's intended to be permanent, if you properly define or properly construct it, should not be able to allow for its own destruction. Now, certainly you might have transitional or transitory systems where you create one political system for the purpose of trying to develop another. But once you've developed a constitution or a rule or a regime, that rule or regime can't allow forces within inside of it to destroy itself. And so given that, we also understand that all political systems are going to have certain inherent contradictions, and democracy is just like any other. Some of the things within the construction of democracy push or move a society towards the destruction of democracy unless they're properly contained. So, for example, one of the characteristics, one of the components of democracy is that the 4 characteristic pieces of a democratic system can sometimes be turned against one another. That is to say, if I wanted to have something like perfect popular control, where we have elections and the winners of those elections always get whatever they want, then those who become powerful might use their power, use their victory in elections to take away the liberty or the equality of other people. If you do that, the democratic system immediately collapses, since you have to have individual participation and equality among individuals through participation in order for a democratic system to exist. So as we think about democracy, we have to think about ways in which we can limit the power of popular vote. And popular vote's not the only way that we can think about this problem or this contradiction. It turns out that when we think through political systems, especially when we get to systems of really any size, we begin to notice that certain social divisions become inherent. In fact, that social hierarchy, a theme of these videos, that social hierarchy is a characteristic of most political systems. So how can you have a political system or a government that's built upon equality if social hierarchy is almost inevitable? How can you have a political system that's based upon freedom if divisions exist within society that limit the ability of people to make choices? And this problem gets bigger the greater the level of inequality. The more inequality, the greater the threat to the democracy or to the political system. And this threat could come from either above or below. If you have high degrees of inequality, then the individuals at the top of the political system are going to try to make it more and more difficult for the masses at the bottom to use their superior numbers to make laws or make changes that would take their property or their advantage away. Similarly, if you find yourself in the bottom of the social hierarchy and you remain there permanently, at some point you're going to have to turn to violent or non-traditional means of political participation if you want to have your voice heard so you can disrupt the political system. The fact that there is a lack of a common good in most societies, especially if societies of any given size, makes it very difficult for democracy to exist on a national level without some restrictions on the ability of the participants to do whatever they want to. And speaking of participants, a third flaw in democracy is that if you're going to allow citizens to have control over the system, if you're going to allow the people to make choices, then that means that the people have to have the capacity to understand and make all those choices. And honestly, that's just not possible in complex systems. As a voter, you have a set of personal, but also a set of public responsibilities. You're concerned with your day-to-day life, with your job, with your family, with how to get ahead, or at least how not to fall behind. And it is very easy to become so consumed with the events of your personal life that you can't pay sufficient attention to your public responsibilities. I mean, how many citizens can actually vote in every single election and educate them about every single candidate on the ballot, or educate themselves on every single issue under consideration? It's just simply not possible. You might be able to accomplish this in relatively small communities, but on any political system, any government of any size, it's essentially not going to be realistic for the individual average citizen to be able to have the capacity to fully understand or appreciate, and therefore to fully engage in the political system. And we also typically understand that it's not just capacity that matters in a democracy. Rather, we generally believe that democracy requires citizens to have a certain character. And by character, we mean that in order for the democratic political system to work, to continue to work, members of the society must from time to time be willing to do what's in the collective interest to protect the state or protect the society, rather than what's in their own personal interests. They might have to behave sacrificially. Think about military service or a jury duty or paying taxes, things that we might have to do that personally don't benefit us, but that do benefit the system and therefore make democracy more likely to exist. We also have to have certain levels of education. Political policy, public policy is hard to understand. Tax policy, foreign policy, these things are hard to understand. Figuring out how the political system works requires a certain level of education. At a bare minimum, it requires literacy. It's very unlikely that all citizens of the society will have the same level of education, or even a level of education necessary to understand the complexities of all of the policy choices that will be put in front of them. One other characteristic that's important of citizens in a democracy is that they have to have a certain level of tolerance. And by that, I simply mean that one member of the society must be willing to allow others to exist, even if they have different views from them. If I want to exclude somebody on the basis of race or gender, if I want to say that someone in my society should not be allowed to participate because of their religion or their country of origin, if I think that individuals in our society shouldn't even be allowed to be counted, because by counting them, there's a chance that they might have some role or participation in the political system, then I have to question whether or not democracy can actually exist in this society or in this state. Now, given the fact that democracies have these inherent flaws, it may be possible to create a democratic system, but it's unlikely that any perfect or pure or unchecked political system that is democratic would be able to survive for very long. Yet we also know that systems have not only been created and have survived as democracies, but some of them have become increasingly democratic, more democratic over time. So how do they pull it off? Well, there's no one correct answer to this question, because it turns out that the ways in which you have to limit the ills of democracy depend upon which of the problems are greatest in your individual society. But what we can be sure of is this, that all democratic systems, any system that wants to help to maintain itself, has to begin with the notion that there is a law above the law. I call this the capital L law, the law that governs how laws are created or enforced that are above the laws that there are themselves. These are rules that protect democracy, such as entrenched civil liberties and civil rights, or structures that maybe sometimes prevent majority rule from winning. These are structures that limit the powers of the citizens. But these are also structures, these are also characteristics that limit government, maybe through creating transparency or by creating conflicts within government so that once a majority captures power, it can't use that power for abusive means. Now, I hope that you check out some of the previous videos if you haven't already. I also hope that you check out some of the future videos, because in future videos, we're going to spend a little bit more time talking about how political systems, especially American national and state political systems, think differently about the problem of solving the threat of democracy to itself, and also think differently about how making sure that individual citizens can remain free and participate in the political system without actually destroying it. I hope you join us next time. Thank you very much.